Hello, this is Joe from Students in Aviation, and today we are going to do your first discovery flight. I'm going to help out with this so you can kind of see what's going on here. So what you want to do is make sure the ISM started up and you select your default situation. I'm just flying over the Baraboo-Dells Airport, and just out of curiosity, you might find this interesting. Our hangar is right here at the Baraboo-Dells Airport. That's us. What we're going to do, though, for the discovery flight, we're going to take off from the Reedsburg Airport, which is about 9 miles west of the Baraboo-Dells Airport, and we're going to fly to Baraboo. And I'm going to show you some of the controls here. A couple things you're going to want to have before we get started. Make sure you acquaint yourself with this document right here. It describes all the controls that are used in the sim itself. Make sure that your seat is also nice and close to the sim. You should be able to look down at the control yoke here, and you should put your feet on the rudder pedals. So down here you can see the rudder pedals there. I've got my feet on there. Notice I've got them on the lower portion of the rudder pedals. They slide back and forth like this. We're going to use that when we do our flight. So to actually start our flight, the first thing we want to do is hold down the Alt key and tap 2. That's the Reedsburg runway situation there. So I'm just going to tap that, and that'll take us to the Reedsburg Airport. The first thing I want to do is raise my seat so I can see a little bit better outside the window, or the cockpit window there. So I'm just going to tap this white button right here on my yoke, and watch what happens on the sim when I do that. I'm just going to tap it. See how it just raises our view? If I tap it again, it just returns it back to the other view. We want to keep it up a little bit higher so we can kind of see outside the windshield there. So we've got our control yoke, and notice on the sim when I turn my control yoke on the in real life, it turns the sim's control yoke. A couple other things you'll want to keep in mind for this flight. You've got your front trigger buttons, which actually are located here on your diagram here for the yoke there, the right trigger and the left trigger. Those are, you squeeze those buttons. So I'm just going to pull on this little button right here, and watch what it does. As I pull on that, it looks to the right there. If I do the same thing on the left hand side of the yoke, I squeeze that trigger button, it's going to look to the left. And the reason we do that is because we're going to need to do a pattern entry at Baraboo. Alright, so let's get acquainted with the aircraft. You should have gone through several other videos on how to use the controls on the ISM itself, but we're just going to review some things here. So a couple of things that are really important in this demo here. We want to make sure that you know how to use your rudder pedals. So the rudder pedals, when I push my right rudder down, it's going to cause the aircraft to yaw to the right. If I push my left rudder down right here, you can see that's my left rudder. Pushing that in, that's going to yaw the aircraft to the left. Before every flight, you always want to check your flight controls. So what we do is we call it boxing the controls. Push your yoke all the way in. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. Just push it all the way in. Turn it all the way to the left. Bring it all the way back. Turn it all the way to the right until it hits the stop, and then push it all the way in. That just makes sure that we've got good controls, or that we don't have any wires that are binding on the sim itself or on the aircraft itself. And then we do the same thing with the rudder pedals. We push them all the way to the right, like this, and then all the way to the left, like that. And then I like to also tap on the toe brakes. Toe brakes, again, are just exactly that. You step on your toe as you rotate those rudder pedals forward. So we're just going to do that. All right, so now we're actually ready to take off. Now, normally we've gone through a checklist but for the discovery flight, we typically don't get into this a whole lot. When you start getting into your actual flight training, you're going to need to start learning these checklists. So this is a typical checklist right here for a Cessna 172. We won't go into that now. That'll be another lesson. But you would actually go through all these items, make sure everything is checked off correctly, and go through it. So if you're going to be a pilot, you got to get used to this stuff. You have to go through all of those things. You can't memorize it. You just want to sit down and try to get as much out of it, or use the checklist every single item you want to go through there. And then one other document I'm going to show before we actually get started is our SciSim Quick Start Guide right here. So this right here gives you a bunch of instructions, what you can do, pre-takeoff checklist, just a real short checklist here. And then we've got our situations here that we can, if we hold down our Alt-2 key right now, for instance, we'll start back at the Reedsburg Airport. If I hit hold down my Alt key and tap 1 on my keyboard here, it'll actually switch to the Baraboo-Dells approach, or actually the approach on landing at Baraboo-Dells. We're going to leave it where it's at right now. All right, so we want to take off. So the first thing we do, pull our throttle back, just make sure our controls are set properly. Our mixture should be full in. The prop, which is not used in the Cessna 172, is just should be pushed in. And then also, again, last minute checks of the ailerons and rudders, make sure we've got good controls there. We do. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to disengage the brake. You can give it power all day long. I'm going to give it full power right now. You can see I've got throttle going all the way in. And, I guess I did turn off the brakes there. So, okay. So if I tap the brake here, let's just try it one more time here. So I've got the brakes engaged now. I just tapped that brake button right there. So if I give it full power now and the plane doesn't move, that's because the brakes are engaged. So we want to disable that. So I'm just going to tap on the brake button here. And now I'm going to give it full power. Now, a couple things you need to know on takeoff. First off, we're looking for our airspeed right here. We want to take off. We want to rotate at about 55 knots. That's right there on your airspeed indicator right there, about 55 knots. So what you're going to see me do is very gently pull back on the control yoke. That's to get the plane in the air, and then we'll climb out roughly 500 to 1,000 feet per minute, and we'll look at that gauge right there, which you may know is the vertical speed indicator right there. Will be somewhere between here and here. We'll climb up to 2,500 feet, and then we'll do a turn to east toward the Baraboo-Dells Airport, and then we'll come in for a landing. Okay? All right, so one last thing before we take off, we want to use our trim control wheel here. That's really important. I want to trim out the control forces. You'll see me moving that a lot, that control wheel there. So I'm going to move my view down and look at the pedestal there. So I'm just going to tap this and push that down. Okay, there's our trim wheel, and you can see as I adjust my trim wheel here physically, it's adjusting the trim wheel in the real aircraft right there, in the virtual aircraft. So that little white line should be at the takeoff position. So I'm just going to rotate that little white marker there so it says takeoff. It's very important to check before you depart. All right, so now we want to jump back into our pilot seat. So I press my white button here. All right, now we're ready to go. All right, so I've got my feet on the rudder pedals. I've got my hand on the control yoke. Notice a nice loose grip. You don't have to have a death grip on this control yoke, just a very light grip. Now, a couple things, last minute things to remember. When you take off, keep your hand on the throttle. And you want to keep it on the throttle until you get to about 500 feet above ground, and then you can go ahead and take it off and put it on your lap, or adjust things or whatever. The reason for that is if you have a deer or some animal jump out in front of you, or a car pulls out in front of you want to be able to kill that throttle really fast. You want to chop it and pull it all the way back. That brings our power back to basically idle, so we're not producing any thrust, and we can land the aircraft or stay on the ground. But it's always an important thing to have your hand on that throttle when you take off. The other thing is, again, use your trim. All right, so we ready? All right, here we go. So I'm going to apply smooth power, 1001, 1002, 1003, and it should be full power there. You can see my throttle is full. Now, one thing you're going to notice is the aircraft is going to want to veer to the left. That's normal. So we're just going to apply a little bit of right rudder there. You can see, whoops, a little bit too much there. And now I'm going to rotate. We're at V-rotate speed, and we're up in the air. Okay, so now our next step is to use the trim control right here. So I don't have to, you can see if I let go of the control yoke here, the nose kind of wants to dip down. I'm just going to give it just a tad bit of trim here. I don't know if you can see that there. We're climbing up a little over about 1,300 feet per minute. That's all right. We want to get in the air really fast. We're going to climb up to 2,500, and then we're going to do a turn to the right or to the east toward the Baraboo-Dells Airport. Actually, we're going to do a turn early. So I'm just going to go ahead and start our turn. and we want to do a turn to a heading of east. So we look at our directional gyro right here. That's our directional gyro. When that says east under the main line there, that little pointer, well, that's where we want to level off at, or that's where we want to switch to wings level. We can still climb at that altitude or that direction there. So there is east, and it's morning here in the simulator. We're going to climb up. We'll stay at about 2,000 feet. So, all right, and there we are at 2,000. So what I'm going to do now is just bring my throttle back. We don't need to be full throttle all the way to Baraboo. This will give us some time to kind of talk about some things here. So I'm just going to bring my throttle back. Notice it's down to about 2,100 RPM, 2,100 RPM. So the next thing I want to do is trim the aircraft so I don't constantly have to apply pressure to it. So to do this, I'm just going to, normally in real life, you would actually, use your control yoke and adjust it so that you're flying straight and level and the aircraft isn't climbing or descending, and then take your trim wheel and then adjust it so that it trims out the force in your yoke. Because it doesn't have force feedback on the sim, however, we have to kind of guess a little bit. So what I'm doing here is just kind of letting go of the yoke there, and periodically, and just seeing what it does to the aircraft. Now, what we're looking for is this right here, that little area, that horizon to the panel there, that should not change. If we've got our trim set up right, that shouldn't decrease in size or it shouldn't increase in size. If it does, that means that our trim isn't quite right. It does take a little bit of practice. You got to keep in mind that you've got, 2,200, 2,500 pounds of weight up there that you're moving through the air very fast, and it takes a while for it to build up inertia, and when you make a change, it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes a couple seconds, and even a couple of minutes. In the case of trim, we want to make sure that we are patient with that. So that's about right. We're still about 2,000 feet on our altimeter there. That's about 2,000, and we're looking for the Baraboo-Dells Airport. If I squeeze my left trigger button, I can look off to the left. It's not there. I can squeeze my right trigger button. It's not there. Okay, so it's got to be ahead of us yet. So we're about, actually right now, if I look at a kind of cheat right here on our Garmin, you can see that the KDLL, that stands for the Baraboo-Dells Airport. That's the ICAO identifier for the Baraboo-Dells Airport. So we're going to just stay on this heading right for now, and then we're going to land on runway 01 at Baraboo. Okay. And again, notice my hands here, light touches. You don't even have to touch the yoke. Once it's configured and you've got it trimmed all right, you really don't need to use the yoke at all. As a matter of fact, if it's trimmed out perfectly and you have smooth skies, it's just basically just little tweaks here and there to kind of keep the wings level there. All right, so actually the airport, the Baraboo-Dells Airport, is straight ahead of us. And if you look over here, I think it's this area right here. We're going to find out. So I'm just going to swing over there. Now, I know the Baraboo-Dells Airport. We've got the casino just to the north of the airport. So there's a lot of lights around there. And that probably is the airport right there. All right. So normally in a real flight, I'd say Baraboo-Dells traffic, Cessna 1234 is 5 miles west of Baraboo at 2,000 or 1,900, landing 01 full stop Baraboo. That's the radio call that we'd make. And again, you don't have to worry about that right now. As an instructor, that's what I would be doing in the Discovery flight. I would be taking care of that for you. You'd actually be having your hands in the control. The instructor would probably be telling you, let's do a turn, let's, go in there, or, control the aircraft. They'd be guiding you the whole way with the flight. So normally what they would do is they'd take you up and do some turns and stuff like that. But we're going to actually do a full flight here. So, all right, so now we can start seeing some lights there. That looks like runway lights right there. There's that line of lights. And then there's also a faint line of lights right there. That is the runway lighting at the Baraboo-Dells Airport. And again, I recognize that. You may have to fly over the airport or fly around an area to find the airport. If you're using your Garmin Navigator, that makes it a lot simpler. We can see we're really close here to the Baraboo-Dells Airport there. So I'm just going to keep that close. There's the casino right there. I've got a little squad car there, it looks like. All right, so we're coming in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tell Baraboo that we're going to be turning for a left downwind. And the call would be Baraboo traffic, Cessna 123, entering a left downwind, runway 01, full stop, Baraboo. Okay, do our turn here, and I'm going to bring our throttle back a little bit more. We don't have to come in blazing fast at the airport. As a matter of fact, it's always a good idea to slow the aircraft down so you have time to look out for other aircraft here. So we're doing a turn off to the left here. We can see the runway. That makes sense. All right, so we're going to do our turn here, and I'm just going to turn to about a little further than south there. And if I want to look to where the airport is, I'm going to squeeze my left trigger button. And we can see that there indeed is our airport. There's the hangars and everything. You can see the runways all through there. All right, and here I'm going to go ahead and pull back on that a little bit. Now, the first thing you want to do when you get what we call a beam the numbers is you're going to want to drop your flaps. So we'll do that. I'm going to drop my flaps. What's going to happen is the nose is going to pitch up. When that happens, be ready on the trim here and trim that nose down. The flaps do a couple things. They slow the aircraft down. They produce a lot more lift, but they also produce a lot more induced drag here. So that's normal. So again, let's take a look at the airport, make sure we're not getting too far away. Okay, so now we're going to do our turn to left base. And the call out is Baraboo traffic, Cessna 123, turning left base, runway 01, full stop, Baraboo. Okay, and we're going into our left base turn, and you'll learn about this in the materials. We talk about patterns and things like that. And the reason they do this is so that the pilot has time to get configured for landing. It also gives them a time for them to look for any other traffic in the area there. So I'm going to bring my throttle back a little bit more here. I'm going to look off to the right here just to make sure there's no planes coming in. That's common practice there to make sure. And then again, we'll look to the left, and let's lift our wing up a little bit here. Yep, we can see there's the airport. I'm shooting past there, shooting through the approach path there, so I'm just going to do a kind of a steep turn here. I don't want to get too steep on this. Notice our airspeed, we're about 80. We're going to get it slowed down to about 60, and I went way past that, so all right, that's all right. We really don't want to, normally in real life that, it's fine to do this, but you want to avoid this type of situation where you fly way past that center line. So what I want to do is get the plane lined up with the center line of the runway. If you can avoid it, try not to do excessive moves on your yoke. Just light moves, okay? All right, here we go. And the lights just went out. That's because the sun is rising. We've got enough light in there. So I'm going to drop the flaps down another notch. Press that down. And again, the nose is going to pitch up. That's normal. I'm going to bring our throttle back. I'm a little off to the right of the center line here. I'm going to go ahead and bring that back. I'm going to trim my aircraft up a little bit more here. I want to get on that center line here. And what you want to do, we're going to flare here, and we're going to hold the aircraft off the runway. We don't want to just drive the nose into the runway there. We want to do a nice, gentle landing. So that's called the flare, and that's in the last, for a Cessna, about the last 20 feet of height. You're going to start pulling back on that control yoke and cause it to float above the runway itself. The key in doing it correctly is to make sure that the approach is stabilized. That means you're not turn your yoke left and right and stuff like that and pulling back up and down, whatever. You want to make sure it's as stabilized as possible. The only way to do that effectively is to use your trim. Okay, so you've got to get used to using the trim. All right, we're going to go ahead and taxi off the runway here. And I should have made a radio call there. I was busy talking, but I should have made a radio call that said, Baraboo traffic, Cessna 123 on final, runway 01, full stop, Baraboo. All right, so now we're taxiing off the runway. I'm going to just stop here. So I'm rotating my brakes forward. Notice I've got my toe brakes on there. You can see my feet are on the toes of the pedals there, as opposed to sliding them back and forth. We're just, putting the brakes on there. So this is a point in the flight here where we just configure everything for taxiing. So the first thing I want to do here, I'm just going to lean out my engine here a little bit so we don't follow our spark plugs. This is something that an instructor would do on a discovery flight. You wouldn't do this here. And then we want to retract our flaps. So that's with this button right here. Look at the switch right here when I do that. So if I click on this right here, And see all and you can hear the noise of the flaps moving up. That's exactly what it sounds like in real life. Okay, so there's the flaps. They're coming up. Now we're free to taxi to the FBO, or fixed based operator at the Baraboo-Dells Airport, which just so happens to be Spring City Aviation, big supporter of Scion. We do appreciate their help. All right, so we're going to go ahead and give it just a little bit of throttle here. I'm just pushing it a little bit. I'm going to keep my hand on the throttle here to make sure that we don't get going too fast. Normally when you taxi, you're going to use a sparing amount of power. You don't want to taxi faster than a fast pace, if you're walking, or maybe a slow jog. And that's because we don't want to get caught off guard. If something happens, we want to be able to pull the power back and stop the aircraft as soon as we can. So when we're taxiing, we're using our rudder pedals. Notice I'm not touching my yoke at all. I'm putting my hands on my knees here, and I'm just using the rudder pedals to steer the aircraft. That's because on the outside of the aircraft, you can see our trim or our nose wheel. The rudder pedals. I'm going to push my rudder to the right, and watch what happens to that wheel right there. Okay. There we go. I'm pushing the rudder, or the right rudder there, and it steers that little nose wheel. That's what's happening there. So let's get it right on the center line here. That's where we want to taxi, right there. We want to stay on that yellow taxi line. So let's go back into the cockpit here. That's what it should look like when you're inside the cockpit of the aircraft. It's exactly what it looks like. That yellow line looks like it's just going through your right shoulder here if you're sitting on the left side, which is where you would sit on a Discovery flight. And you'll be doing a lot of this stuff on most Discovery flights, depending on the instructor and how they feel. They may have you do the entire flight. We had just one of our students just recently, he did the entire Discovery flight himself, with the exception of a little bit of help from the instructor on landing. So these sims do help a lot, and we hope you're getting a lot of use out of yours. Obviously, you can get a hold of us at any time. Best way to get a hold of me is just Joe, Joe, at studentsinAviation.org. I'm just going to pause a second here. So one thing I didn't neglect to mention here is to our left, I don't know if you can see there's a taxiway sign. So I'm going to look to the right here, and then look to the left to make sure there's no traffic coming. I don't see anybody coming there, so I'm going to go across. Normally what I would do is I'd move my head around there so I could actually see a little bit better, but in the sim it's a little harder to do that. All right, so I keep pulling ahead here. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to park right in front of the FBO there. There, I'm going to stop right here. We're actually on an active runway. It doesn't look like it, but it's a crossing, an intersecting runway. It's a grass strip. So if I look off to our left here, that right there is part of a grass strip right there. And so I'm crossing it. So whenever you cross a grass strip, you always want to look both ways to make sure that there's no traffic coming in. There could be somebody that doesn't have a radio or a Nordo aircraft. So there's our threshold crossing line right there. You can see it. It's got a solid line on the side that's safe, and it's got the dashed lines on the side that where the runway is. So we're right on that runway right now. So let's get off that so we don't get in the way of some other traffic coming in. But small airports like the Baraboo-Dells Airport, you're constantly announcing things in the blind. You really don't know who you're talking to. You just make announcements. So normally I would say, Baraboo-Dells Airport, Cessna 123, taxiing to the FBO at Baraboo-Dells. That's just an announcement to anybody that happens to be in the area on what's called a Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, the CTAF. That's what that stands for. So again, I'm just using my rudders here. I'm not touching my yoke at all. I'm just pressing on the rudder here. And notice the other thing with my rudders is I don't want to put pressure on the toe brakes when I do that. You don't want to be riding the brakes the whole way into your taxi spot or when you're actually departing. So, all right, so here now we're getting close. So I'm going to put my feet up on the tops of the rudder pedals. I'm going a little fast here. So here we go. We're just going to go ahead and taxi right here. And then I'm just going to park the aircraft here. Sometimes there'll be a marshalling person there, and they'll just tell you where to park. They'll have two little batons, little orange batons. You'll go ahead and you'll follow their instructions. They'll give you some marshalling instructions on where to park the aircraft at. Okay, so now we're done. We parked the aircraft. We can go ahead and shut it down. So the first thing we want to do is we want to turn off our avionics switches. So I tap my avionics bus 1, avionics bus 2 is turned off, and then we can actually start turning the aircraft off. So normally what you would do, you'd think, okay, we'll just hit the power switch. No, we don't want to do that. In an aircraft, we're going to want to use our mixture switch right here, mixture lever here. We're going to pull that back, and that's going to starve the engine of fuel when we do that. That's how we shut down an aviation engine. So we'll go ahead, in most cases, like most trainers, you're just going to have a mixture control here. So to watch what happens here, I've got my throttle all the way pulled back. I've got my brakes on. I'm looking outside. Let's just take a look and see if there's anybody around. I don't see anybody there. Anybody there? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull that mixture back here. Okay, so the mixture's back, but we still have our master switches still turned on. So let's, what I'm going to do here is get rid of our yoke on the virtual yoke on there. So to get rid of the virtual yoke, we move this switch right here, the Hat 1 switch, we move that to the left. Watch what happens there when I do that to the yoke on the screen there. It disappears. Now we can kind of see all the switches here. So from here, what I can do is I can just go ahead and use my mouse, and I can go ahead and turn off the rest of the switches. My nav switch I can turn off. Landing light we don't need anymore. Beacon can be turned off. And then we can turn off these two switches. They also happen to be on the power quadrant, the physical power quadrant. So we'll tap the alternator switch, and then we'll tap the battery switch. That turns everything off, and now we won't burn our batteries. But there's one last very important thing. We want to make sure our magneto switch is turned off. If we leave it on like this and somebody happens to swing the propeller, the engine could start. It may just swing a couple times, but it's enough where it could really hurt somebody. So we want to rotate that to the left. So what I'm going to do is move my pointer over here to the left until we get kind of a little left arc there, and it's kind of rotating counterclockwise. I'm just going to click that twice and a third time here. Okay, so now our key switch is turned off there. You can see that right there. That key switch is off. And then normally what we do is we'd pull that key out and set it on the dash. And then from there, hopefully you've enjoyed the flight and you'll go back and get another discovery flight. This is a virtual discovery flight. This kind of gives you an idea of some of the things you'll want to do when you actually go up in the plane. But you could take a challenge, do the challenge where you take off from Reedsburg, take off. Again, don't forget to use your rudder pedals. They work, side to side, which turns your rudder in the back of the aircraft. So if I go outside the aircraft, if I push my rudder all the way to the right, it pushes the rudder there. But also notice how it affects the nose wheel there. If I push it all the way to the right there, push it all the way to the left, while we're at it here, let's take a look at the elevators. There's the elevators. I can move those up and down there. And then ailerons right there, back and forth there. Okay, so I think you're all set to go. If you have any questions, again, reach out to us. We're looking forward to seeing you in the skies.